it's supposed to be springtime here. You know, but we have cold and we have clouds. But, you know, that's the reality of the situation. And so we've got to learn to see the beauty in the cold and the clouds, and see the beauty that's here beyond the cold and the clouds, you know. I mean, the lilacs in bloom and the trees and the flowers and everything. And so I was thinking that's very much like the situation of getting sick and approaching death. It may not be what we want at that particular time, but it's what is happening. And so then the question is, how do we find beauty in that experience? And how do we see the beauty and kindness that's all around us at that time? Okay? So they're very analogous things, you know, because we could spend the whole weekend here lamenting that it's supposed to be spring and it's not. Or we could appreciate that it is spring, but it's just early spring over Memorial Day. It's March over Memorial Day, so that's okay. And there's still a lot of beauty that's going on. Okay, so same way when we get sick, when we're actively approaching death. You know, how do we have a positive mental state? Because at those times it could be very easy to get really stuck into self-pity or anger, disillusionment, despair. But none of those emotions are particularly useful. And so what I'm getting at is, at any particular time in our life or in our death process, we have a choice about how we're going to feel. Most of the time, we don't realize we have a choice about how we're going to feel. Instead, we are just on reactive mode. And so whatever happens, we react to it in our habitual ways. Yeah? And we don't even realize we're reacting in habitual ways. We just think this is the only way one could possibly react. It's true, isn't it? Yeah? So this happens all throughout our life. We never see that the way we are looking at a situation is creating an experience of it, and that we have the choice at any particular time of changing our experience by changing the way we approach things. Okay, but we usually don't see it, and so we continue to point the finger at other people or at the weather. Okay, but that attitude doesn't really get us anywhere, and also it's unrealistic. Yeah, because we are, you know, creating our experience. Okay, so with that said, let's do a little bit of meditation, just to settle our mind and generate our motivation, and then I'll begin talking about death and caring for the dying. And let's recall our motivation and put what we're about to do very squarely within the framework of offering service and being of benefit to all living beings. And so specifically, we're going to listen and share so that we can free ourselves of misconceptions and increase our love, compassion, and wisdom, so that we can attain full Buddhahood and be of the greatest benefit to each and every living being. So think that that's our long-term purpose, the deeper reason why we're here. So, just a little bit about the title of the course, Death and Caring for the Dying. I think probably most of us want to skip over the first part, the death part, and go to the how can we take care of the dying. The dying meaning other people who are dying, right? You know, so when we're with other people who are dying, how do we help them? How do we take care of them? Yeah? We all want to learn that. Yeah. But we want to skip over the death part because the death part might pertain to us. Okay. Actually, the caring for the dying pertains to us too because we're also dying. Aren't we? Yeah, since the moment we were conceived in our mother's womb, we've been in the process of dying and approaching death. But it's so strange the way we use language. We think living and dying are opposites, and if you're doing one, you aren't doing the other. Don't we? Yeah, so we think I'm living, and then there's these other people who are really sick and they're dying. And there's some amorphous point between the two that I'm never going to cross. But like I said, from the moment we've, our consciousness took place on the fertilized egg in our mother's womb, ever since then, we have been in the process of approaching death. Yeah. So we usually think when we're growing up, we're not approaching death, but we are, aren't we? Yeah, because we don't know when death will come. And so every moment after conception is getting closer to it. Okay, so living and dying aren't opposites. They're basically happening at the same time. We're living and dying at the same time. So we're actually quite intimate with death already. Yeah, or we're intimate with dying already because we're living. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we go on. Just another point that I want to talk about before we get into the material is in the second session each morning, we'll be doing some chanting before we have a silent meditation. And the chanting that we're doing it's from the Chinese tradition, but it's, Mahayana, which is, the Tibetan is also Mahayana. And so the first chant, which I think you rehearsed a little bit this morning, on the Namo Benzasetya Monifo, that one is, paying homage to the fundamental teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. So here, it's Shakyamuni Buddha, who is the founder of, or the one who turned the Dharma wheel in our era. And he's called the fundamental teacher in the sense that he was the one that actually taught the Dharma in the time, in a historical time where the Buddha Dharma did not exist. So he's fundamental in that sense, okay, or our original teacher. We can also think that the Buddha is our fundamental teacher because basically everything we learn goes back to the Buddha and is rooted in the Buddha's wisdom. Okay? And so we're paying homage to the Buddha when we're doing the chanting and bowing. And as you'll learn, one side of the room is bowing and the other side is doing the chanting, and then we switch and they bow and this side comes up and chants. And so this is a purification practice. So purification is very important while we're alive to do that because it's going to be important at the time of death. Because we've all created, we're in the process of acting all the time. And And so our actions, our karma, sometimes it's constructive when it's motivated by kindness and generosity and wisdom, and sometimes it's destructive when it's motivated by recklessness or heedlessness or the selfish mind, and so on. So we have all these different karmic seeds placed in our mind stream from actions we've done this life and also previous lives. And at the time of death, one or more of those karmic seeds is going to ripen and influence what we get reborn as. So if we've spent our life, acting in very self-centered ways, since we tend to be creatures of habit, then those are the mental states that are going to arise when we die, and destructive karma is likely to ripen. If we develop a habit of cultivating constructive thoughts, then we act constructively, and those kind of thoughts are more likely to arise at the time we die and influence what karmic seeds ripen. So, since we've created a whole wealth of destructive actions, I don't know about you, but I have. Some of you may be familiar with the 10 non-virtues: killing, stealing, unwise or unkind sexual behavior, lying, creating disharmony, harsh speech, idle talk, coveting, ill will or malice, and wrong views. And so, having done these all repeatedly, putting those kind of imprints in the mind, then, we don't want to die with those imprints being in our mind, being ready to be fertilized and coming up. So we need to do a lot of purification. So to neutralize those imprints of destructive karma. So when we're doing the bowing, okay, when you're on the ground and we stay down for a while, really visualize Shakyamuni Buddha surrounded by all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, an incredible light flowing into you, and think all beings are around you and the light flowing into them, and that it's purifying all these seeds of destructive karma. Okay? So we're not just chanting la la, and we're not just going up and down, but we're really trying to meditate at this time, and specifically have a sense of regret for any kind of destructive actions we may have done, and then really think that the light of compassion and wisdom from the Buddha is entering us and purifying all those tendencies so that they won't ripen at the time of death, and also purifying the ignorance, anger, and attachment, our habits of being ignorant, anger, and attached, so that they don't continue in our life, making us create more destructive actions. Okay? So that's how we're thinking when we're doing this, the chanting and the purification. Even when you're standing up, when your side's standing up, then you can similarly visualize the light. And you're doing the chanting and really thinking of the qualities of the Buddha and thinking, I want to develop those qualities. So in that way, doing the bowing and the chanting becomes an action of our body, speech, and mind. The body's bowing, the speech is chanting, the mind is visualizing, and also, having regret and a determination not to do it again, and so on. Okay? So today we'll be doing that part of the chanting. Tomorrow we'll be doing the Amitabha chanting. We'll add that on. So I'll explain how to think for that tomorrow morning. And if I don't, remind me. Okay, any questions so far? Anything? Okay. Okay, so we've got to, before we can think about helping the dying, meaning helping ourselves and helping others who are dying, we have to really understand why contemplating death is important in our spiritual practice, and what the value is, and how thinking about this can help us. And I say this because our culture is very death-denying. I remember as a little girl, there was, not too far from our house, there was a forest lawn memorial park. They don't even call it a cemetery. It's a memorial park. And I remember being very young and driving past it and saying, Mom and Dad, what is that? What do they do there? And they said, well, it's a cemetery. Well, what's a cemetery? Well, it's where dead people are. Well, what's death? And then there was silence. My parents didn't know what to say. And finally they said something like, well, people go to sleep for a long time. But I could, more than what they said, I could sense their unease about talking about death. And so in our whole culture, it's like that. I mean, even the restrictions on the media now cannot show U.S. troops dying or being dead or whatever, anything, Death is sanitized. It's relegated to what happens somewhere else. And so therefore, we think that death is what happens to other people, but not us. That somehow we're immune. And we feel this, We wake up every day and we don't think, oh, by this evening I could be in my next life. We don't think that. We wake up and we think, oh, well, what can I enjoy today? Okay? So the appearance of this life is so strong for us, and our grasping at being permanent, here permanent means being unchanging, is so strong that our mind is really split off from reality. Yeah? So I guess, we all always talk about people disassociating, in psychology. Well, this is a natural state for us, it seems. Yeah. Yeah. We're dissociating from the reality of what our life is. So when you become very serious about a spiritual practice, then reflecting on death becomes important because it becomes the fuel that activates your spiritual practice and keeps you on track. So in the Lam Rim, the stages of the path to enlightenment, they often, before presenting any topic, talk about the benefits of contemplating this topic and the disadvantages of not contemplating it. And so it is with the meditation on impermanence and death. What are the disadvantages of not contemplating it? What are the benefits of contemplating it? Because if we know those, then we'll have some energy and interest and enthusiasm to contemplate death, and because we'll see the benefits that accrue from doing it. Okay. So first of all, before we see the benefits of contemplating death, what are the disadvantages of ignoring it, as we've been doing up until now? Well, the first disadvantage is that we never think of the Dharma. And here Dharma means transforming our mind, generating constructive mental states, diminishing the power of destructive ones. So if we don't remember death, we don't even think of doing a spiritual practice, because we feel we're just going to live forever, and we don't think of the connection between our actions and the results of our actions. Okay? So we don't remember the practice. Second disadvantage is even we remember the Dharma, we don't practice it. We might say, oh yeah, the spirituality is important, but mañana. I have some other things I want to do today, and I'm young, so I'm at the beginning of my life, I'm turning 60 this year, I'm still at the beginning. My definition of young changes every decade. I'm still young, and old age hasn't come about yet. Yeah. So we always put off, I'll do my spiritual practice later, when I'm old. Yeah, there's too much to do now. Life is too interesting. I have so many things that are on my plate, so many things I want to accomplish. So mañana. Okay? Then the third disadvantage is even if we remember the Dharma, even if we practice the Dharma, we don't practice it purely, because the thoughts of the 8 worldly concerns get mixed up in our practice. So I'll talk more about the 8 worldly concerns a little bit later. But basically, what they refer to is seeking the pleasure of this life and seeking to be free of any discomfort in this life. So even we try and practice the Dharma, we remember to practice, we try to practice, but our thoughts still go to how can I be comfortable, and how can people like me, and how can I be right, and how can I win these arguments, and how can I be well known, and how can I be loved and appreciated, and how can I stop all these people from criticizing me and noticing my faults and doing things I don't like. Yeah, and so that's why we don't practice purely, because even if we try to practice, we're still doing it for these same old motivations of how can I practice Dharma to look good, to get something, to be somebody. Okay, so our practice isn't pure. Okay, a fourth fault of not remembering death is that our practice lacks intensity and it lacks consistency. And so this we can see in general. I can't tell you, how many people come and say, oh, I was really doing very well in my practice, and then I stopped practicing for a while. And sometimes they say, I don't know why, but sometimes they say, I lost my job, so I stopped practice. And other people say, I got a job, so I stopped practicing. And then some people say, I got divorced, so I stopped practicing. And other people say, I got married, so I stopped practicing. And, there's no consistency to the practice. We're stopping and starting. And as we know, whenever we don't do something consistent, we always have to start back over training ourselves at the beginning. Okay? And so also our practice lacks intensity, because we'll sit down to practice, but we don't really have any, like, I should practice right now. But you can't should yourself. I should. I got myself the cushion. I should practice. But I really got to see. I might have gotten some very important email. I think I better go look at my email and say. And let's see. There may have been some text messages coming in for me, so I'll check that. Then I'll meditate. Then I'll text a little bit. Meditate. Then I'll meditate. We think this is funny. We think, oh, ha, ha. But I just came back from New York with the 3 of us went to hear His Holiness's teachings there. And I met an old friend of mine who was sitting in the balcony. And she said what shocked her is she was looking down, and the people in the front row who paid the most to get the best tickets, that when His Holiness was speaking in Tibetan or going on too long, they were texting. And then when the English came, they would listen and then go back to texting when His Holiness was speaking into that. So, this actually happens. She said she was very shocked, and I was too. Okay, so practice lacks intensity and consistency. Then, fifth disadvantage of not remembering death is that we get involved in all sorts of destructive actions. Yeah, because our usual, MO is I can do what I want as long as I don't get caught. Yeah, so we're not really thinking, is an action destructive or constructive? Is it good to do? What kind of imprint is it going to be leaving on my mind? We're usually thinking, am I going to get caught or not? So if we don't think about death, then, of course, none of us think we're going to get caught. Yeah, prison happens to other people too. So then we just do whatever negative action, we want because, anyway, it's just a little one, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so we get involved in really negotiating our ethical conduct. Yeah, we negotiate our ethical conduct. It's just a little lie, I'm just being a little unreliable. Actually, I'm not unreliable at all. All these other people should know they should fill in for me. Just the way our mind thinks. Okay? And then the sixth disadvantage of not remembering death is that we die with regret. Because the thing is that eventually, death is on our doorstep, and we haven't practiced, we haven't changed our mind our whole life. We've just continued with our bad habits. And all of a sudden, death is there, and we're realizing that we don't have a lot of merit, good karma to take with us. And then also we have all these regrets for how we've treated other people in the past, and regrets for the actions we've done even when other people haven't been directly influenced, but we know they're negative actions. And so then there's this incredible amount of regret at the time of death, which I think must be really, really painful. Yeah. Okay, so these are the 6 disadvantages of not remembering death. Okay, then there's 6 advantages of remembering death and impermanence. The first one is that if we remember death, then we're going to act in meaningful ways, because we're going to be thinking about karma. We're going to be thinking about the kinds of imprints we put on our mind stream and the kind of results that we're going to get. And, we're going to have some purpose, spiritual purpose in our life, and then be able to weigh whether our actions are guiding us towards that spiritual purpose or away from that spiritual purpose. So we'll tend to act meaningfully. Okay? Then second benefit is our positive actions will be powerful, because we're not going to be distracted by the concerns of, being comfortable, being popular, being famous, looking good, winning, being right, all this kind of stuff. We're not going to be, our positive actions won't be sullied by these kinds of distractions. Okay? Then also remembering death at the beginning of our spiritual practice is very important, because it's what gets us going. It's what wakes us up from this sleep of I'm permanent and death happens to other people. Because when we really begin to think that death happens to us, then we want to, do a spiritual practice. We want to practice the Dharma. We want to transform our mind. Okay, because we realize that at the time we die, our mind is coming with us. So if we want to die with the way our mind is right now, that's our choice. But if you don't like your present mental state a whole lot, then you really want to transform it. Okay, then the third advantage, okay, that was the third advantage. The fourth advantage is that remembering death is useful in the middle of our practice. So not only at the beginning to get us going, but at the middle to keep us going. Because sometimes I've noticed, like, people will practice the Dharma for a while, and they'll notice this, right away, this improvement in their mental state. They really experience that. And then after a while, they kind of plateau out. And so then in the middle of their practice, it's like, well, I'm not making any big progress anymore, so what the heck? And then they just go back to doing what they were doing before. They don't continue practicing. Your Dharma makes you feel a little bit better when you start, and then, okay, I feel better, so I don't need to keep practicing. Anyway, it's too long to get to the Dharma Center, too far to get to the Abbey. I can't spend that much time driving. To go out to dinner and to go to the movies, yes. But to go to the Abbey for Dharma teaching, no. But all of you made it here this weekend. But I bet you before you got here there was some thought of, well, maybe I shouldn't actually come. But you made it here.
Only if the train comes here.
Okay, and then the fifth benefit of remembering death is that it's useful at the end of our practice, because when we, gain realizations, then, death enthuses us to really share what we've learned with others, because it makes our life meaningful, and because it's a way to directly be of benefit to others, okay, who are also subject to death. And so we want to help others to remember that they are also mortal living beings, so that they will practice as well. And then the sixth benefit is that then we'll die very peacefully, without regret and without fear. Yeah, and I think all of us want a peaceful death, don't we? Yeah. So of course we can't control the way we die, but if we practice well, we can at least begin to manage and perhaps even later control our mental attitude when we're dying. Okay, and it's our mental attitude that makes death either difficult or easy. Okay, so those are the disadvantages and advantages. So let me just pause again. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Deal with, I think some people have said to me, you talk too much about death, and they see it as a disadvantage, like it's depressing.
Ah, right.
Kind of world.
Okay. So many people, they look at Buddhism and say, oh, you talk about death, you're pessimistic. Yeah, Buddhism says life is suffering, and then you think about death, and you're just so pessimistic. Well, being pessimistic, the Buddha doesn't need to teach us how to do that. Okay? Being afraid of death, we don't need to learn that from the Buddha either. We're quite naturally afraid of death. That's why we don't think about it, and why our society doesn't show it. Yeah. The idea of talking about death in Buddhism is, first of all, it's a reality. It's going to happen. So if we understand it in an accurate way, in a realistic way, in a beneficial way, then we can prepare for it. And when we prepare for it, then we can have a pleasant death. If we don't think about death, if we pretend it doesn't exist and it's not going to happen, then it comes upon us very suddenly. We're shocked. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to think. We have no idea how to work with our mind, because we've been living our life completely on automatic. Like I said at the beginning, whatever mental state we feel, we just go with it, instead of even thinking about looking at a situation differently so we can adjust our mental state. Okay? So it's actually the people who don't want to think about death who are the ones that are pessimistic, because they think that death is something pessimistic. In Buddhism, it's not pessimistic. It's just reality.